In 2012, right before the start of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, the Bleach community was rife with both speculation and excitement. After all, we'd just been given 3 or so weeks worth of the Dagger, a supplementary material designed to drop tantalizing hints regarding the current status of the Gotei 13, and also upcoming story hints for the final arc of Bleach. And at this point, both myself and I think the majority of the Bleach community had decided that the Quincy would show up in some form or another to play a fairly major role in the final arc. After all, we'd just been told that the Waco Mundo arc belonged to Orihime, the Lost Agent arc was supposedly Chad's, and therefore it seemed fair to assume that the final arc would be Uryu's. Of course, this all turned out to be correct. The Quincy would actually return in the Thousand Year Blood War arc as the main villains, and Uryu would be embroiled in that. Now, before all this happened, back during the speculation phase, I thought that if the Quincy were going to come back and be a major force in Bleach, then one character would definitely play a pivotal role in whatever that story was. And that character, of course, is the 12th Division Captain Mayuri Kurotsuchi. Now, of all the captains, Mayuri is the one who has a real, tangible history with the Quincy. In fact, his very existence in Bleach, as far as we as readers go, is intrinsically tied to Uryu and the past that Uryu brings with him in that fight. Mayuri's first ever fight in the story is against Uryu, and that whole thing is just drenched in Quincy history and lore, and it also paints Mayuri as something of a crazed, depraved villain as far as the Quincy's go. We find out that not only is he responsible for the death of Uryu's grandfather, but also that he has researched, dissected, and just downright ruined the lives of plenty of Quincy after the Purge 200 years ago. So Kubo has already effectively painted Mayuri as an enemy of the Quincy, and despite the character's gradual development over time and his overall mellowing out from his completely maniacal mad scientist phase, there's definitely bad blood there. Or so you'd think. Despite that, Kubo went a completely different route with both Mayuri and the Quincy that I expected. I expected Mayuri to play a big role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and I was right, but for all the wrong reasons. I thought that Mayuri was definitely going to be a target of revenge, some kind of retribution from the Quincy, but not only does Mayuri not get any of his just desserts in any way, shape or form, he's actually heralded as something as a hero of war during this arc. And not only that, but the Quincy themselves are not really bothered about the Purge 200 years ago or any of the injustices that they have seemingly faced in the history of Bleach. These guys are all about moving forwards and just destroying all 3 worlds. So I think myself and many of you guys in the community probably felt that Mayuri perhaps got off a bit lightly in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but that's what we're here to look at today. As I also think that Mayuri in this arc changes to become truly the best incarnation of this character we have ever seen. And I really like Mayuri, and I think I love his mad scientist shtick as well, but I do think that he truly comes into his own as a member of the Gotei 13 and as a captain as well in this arc. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Mayuri's role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. This is a character you guys have been asking for ages regarding his role in this storyline, as many people see him as something as an MVP for the Gotei 13 side. Before we begin, however, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to do that right now. You're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week, and we're on the last push now to 50,000 subs. If we could hit that soon, that would just be absolutely incredible. And also, if you do enjoy this video, guys, make sure to show your support by giving it a thumbs up. I really appreciate that as well. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you stay up to date with all of my videos. So when I said I think Mayuri comes into his own in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, I truly meant it. And I actually think this is the arc where he really starts taking his position as a captain seriously. And that might sound crazy, however, I think Mayuri is actually more similar to, say, Kenpachi than he would ever like to admit. Both of these guys are much more invested in their own self-interests than they are the greater good of the Soul Society and the human world. Kenpachi has an insatiable lust for battle, and Mayuri has an insatiable curiosity that can only be cured through research. That's all he really cares about, and he so far has been less than invested in the, so we say, greater worries of the Soul Society. He takes part in most of these battles because it serves him to do so, but not out of any greater obligation to his comrades or anything like that. But I truly believe that all changes for Mayuri in the Thousand Year Blood War arc to the point where he takes an active role on the front line as a real commander of the Gotei 13's forces, and like I said a minute ago, it is probably my favourite incarnation of this character, and he does feel like he has grown significantly from his time in the Soul Society arc. Kubo puts Mayuri front and centre in this arc, literally from the word go. He is the second character you even see in this story arc. Akon approaches him in the research and development department, basically saying how the Sutra scale is off the charts, hollows are being destroyed like there's no tomorrow across the human world, and something really bad is happening. To which Mayuri cryptically replies that it must be them. I don't know if we were supposed to not know who he was talking about. It was pretty obviously the Quincy, but, you know, it's a cool moment regardless. But I also want to take a sec to talk about Mayuri's design, because he actually goes through 4 different designs in the Thousand Year Blood War arc alone, which I love. And I pretty much universally like all of them. I don't think any of them are necessarily as iconic as his pharaoh headdress design that he has in Waco Mundo, but I do really like all of them, maybe with the exception of his epilogue look, which I don't necessarily like as much, but maybe that's because we spent less time with it. But this first design, for instance, with the enormous headdress going down his back, I think it looks really, really cool. But already, as soon as this arc begins, we see Mayuri taking his responsibilities a little more seriously. And I have to say, I think it does wonders for the tone of the arc as well. Kubo really kicks things off with this dour, dark, foreboding sense that something really bad is going to happen to the Soul Society, and that's only exemplified by characters like Mayuri shirking their normal, stereotypical character traits in favour of actually seemingly coming together for the common good. Mayuri is there giving the report to the rest of the captains, letting them know that the initial invaders who killed Sasakibe seem to be Quincy's. And when Yamamoto demands to know the location of their hideout, an uncharacteristic Mayuri kind of keeps his head down. He's like, we don't actually know yet. And I think it does wonders, like I said, for setting the tone. But a scene that really came out of nowhere and truly exemplified the way Mayuri is going to approach this arc is the one-on-one talk he has with Yamamoto behind the scenes. And this was just such a cool look at the inner workings of the Soul Society that really came out of nowhere. So we find out that in order to stabilise the fracturing balance of the worlds, Mayuri had a bunch of Rukongai citizens murdered. Now, although Yamamoto doesn't necessarily disagree with this course of action, he does basically call Mayuri out and say if your research and development department had been more on the ball, this would never have been necessary in the first place, to which Mayuri stands his ground to the head captain and says, no, you didn't heed my warning way back when the Ichigo and his gang invaded when I fought Uryu Ishida, and I warned you that Uryu's appearance maybe indicates the Vandenreich is still around. You didn't heed that warning, and you also didn't kill Yhwach 1,000 years ago. This is on your shoulders. And I love this more assertive Mayuri, willing to stand up even to the head captain himself in a one-on-one scenario behind closed doors. It gives you a really good look at the shady inner workings of the Soul Society and how the upper echelon of the Soul Society can kind of get away with anything as long as it's all done behind their backs. And I love how Mayuri is the one who seems to be really prodding at Yamamoto. This is when Yama's leadership is kind of crumbling around him a bit. Everything's kind of going wrong for Yama at this point, and I kind of wish Kubo had maybe done a little bit more with this, showing the fracturing of the Soul Society's inner circle. But regardless, I love that it's Mayuri who takes charge here to tell Yamamoto and put him in his place. I think that's really, really cool, and that's exactly what I mean by it seems like Mayuri is taking his responsibility as a captain more seriously. And this newfound selfless Mayuri continues on into the first invasion, once Byakuya, Hitsugaya, Soifon and Komamura all lose their Bankai to the Quincy. Mayuri was there trying to get some kind of technical readout on these guys to understand better what they can do and then disperse that information out to his colleagues, who unfortunately acted without waiting for him, something that he is incredibly angry about. And I love that. Yes, Mayuri is probably acting at the end of the day in his own self-interest, in that he doesn't want to die, as I'm sure most of them are, but it really is refreshing to see him actually wanting to work actively on the battlefield with his comrades, rather than taking a totally flippant attitude to it, as he has done in the past. Once the first invasion comes to a close, we do see him a couple more times. He's there to deliver the bad news to Ichigo that his broken Tensa Zangetsu will never return to the way it was before, and then he meets up with the Royal Guard when they arrive in the wake of Soul Society's destruction, where we find out that he has some history with one of their members, Senju Maru, but unfortunately we don't find out much more than that. Mayuri himself is then absent for a pretty hefty part of the arc during the wind-up to the second invasion. We get a very brief glimpse that he's working on something behind closed doors. Akon attempts to spy on him and discovers that maybe he's creating something in secret, but we don't get to find out what it is just yet. And then when the Vandenreich launch their all-encompassing second invasion, where they replace the Soul Society with the Schattenbereich, using their command over shadows, Mayuri is there ready and waiting. And now, as far as I'm concerned, this part of the story, where Mayuri leaves his secret laboratory, now dressed in this completely ostentatious and ridiculous outfit that just radiates light, this is Mayuri as he exists for the rest of the arc, and this is the true exemplification of the Mayuri who takes real charge in this war. Basically, Askin Naklavar has arrived in the Research and Development Bureau, or what was left of it anyway, and begins to chide them on the fact that the Quincy have been there all the time. However, to his surprise, a door opens essentially out of thin air behind him, and Mayuri reveals himself. Now we're wearing this ridiculous outfit that's constantly giving off light. Now, while it might look ridiculous, it obviously has an incredibly interesting purpose, and it shows you just how many steps ahead of the rest of the Soul Reapers Mayuri actually was. Not only is he wearing this ridiculous light outfit, but he has actually kitted out this small laboratory with just wall-to-wall light sources. There are no shadows in here whatsoever. And that's because Mayuri was actively working on the fact that he figured out the Quincy were using shadows for traversal during the first invasion, so what he's done essentially is created a stronghold for the Shinigami where no Quincy can penetrate it, and I absolutely love that. And it talks to the wider fact that the Thousand Year Blood War arc feels more like a war than the Arrancar arc ever did, and the fact that Mayuri actively scopes out this stronghold for the Shinigami to return to, which they do later on, and constantly act as a base of operations for them, is just one of the many reasons this feels more like an active battle, which is actually a video I really want to do in the future, really exploring why the Thousand Year Blood War, to me at least, feels more like a real war than the Arrancar arc ever did. And the fact that Mayuri creates this base of operations that is impregnable is one of the major reasons for that. And it's just one of the many times Mayuri really shows himself to be ahead of the curve in this arc. So Mayuri manages to chase Askin away and then begins monitoring the situation from his new laboratory. Everyone has kind of shifted in there from the 12th Division. Akon is now operating from inside this brilliantly, blindingly light lab. But Mayuri and the rest of the Shinigami are proven quickly to be somewhat out of their depth. Without their Bankai, many of the captains are being trounced by the Sternritter. And then, of course, Kisuke Urahara arrives, and we get a really nice moment between Urahara and Mayuri, two major rivals, of course. Mayuri absolutely loathes Kisuke, one of the only beings in the Soul Society ever to be smarter than he is. But also, during the term at the Pendulum arc, Kisuke is the one who created the Research and Development Bureau, and then basically said to Mayuri, you can work under me if you want. So Mayuri's always had this inferiority complex where Kisuke is concerned. But it's so good seeing them come together and work together in this arc to actually help fight the Quincy's. This is exactly what I mean. And it's a really subtle but just great example of character development in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. You actively see Kisuke and Mayuri working together for the greater good, and I love that. That's the sort of thing you just do not get prior to this arc. Mayuri, remember, this is the same guy who doesn't show up at all in the Lost Agent arc because he's just not interested in what's going on whatsoever. He's the only captain not to be seen in that arc at all. And it's just so refreshing here. Now, he is reluctant at first. He does try and cut Kisuke off, but when it's decided that Kisuke actually is going to be here regardless, he just shows up in the lab. Mayuri kind of deals with it, but I love the way he does deal with it. They work together, kind of bouncing ideas off each other. You see their genius at work in real time when Kisuke kind of explains how they're going to get the Bankai back. You can see that Mayuri's already been thinking about this, that the Hollow Reiatsu must be poisonous to Quincy's, and then we of course get the moment where the Shinyaku pills help the Shinigami get their Bankai back, and it's overall a big win for the Gotei 13, facilitated by the guys in the lab. One of Mayuri's biggest faults is of course his pride. He is an incredibly prideful being, but he puts it aside to work with his most hated rival in their time of need, and their relationship only seems to improve as the arc goes on. Much later on, Mayuri then goes up against Giselle Jules, Sternritter Z. And I'm not going to get too far into Mayuri's fights because he has two of them in this arc, and obviously they'll get their own battle analyses later, and he'll get his own character analysis later as well. But I do quite like this fight, but this fight is very emblematic of all of Mayuri's fights, or at least Mayuri's fights in the Arrancar arc anyway, where he just completely demolishes his opponent with no problem whatsoever, having the perfect counter to Giselle's zombies. But it is cool seeing him take on Hitsugaya in zombie form, and also fighting with some of the Arrancar by his side. We get that nice closure on that plot line from a long time ago in the Arrancar arc, the bodies in Xayapola's lab. That's finally closed in this fight. And it's just really nice seeing Mayuri at the top of his game. You know, countering everything the Sternritter throws at him is really enjoyable to see. Mayuri uses Giselle's own zombies and wins the fight by turning them against the Sternritter, using Rose and Kensei to defeat Giselle, and then trying his best to reverse the blood transfusion and bring these guys back to his side, including characters like Hitsugaya. So that actually takes Mayuri out of the game for a little bit, but not too long, as he shows up again to help Byakuya in his time of need against Pepe. And Mayuri is now rolling around the battlefield with his Kurotsuchi corpse unit, which is so very Mayuri. I love it. And Kubo is definitely... He kind of plays down the mad scientist aspect of Mayuri in this arc, because again he is supposed to have mellowed out somewhat, but real traces of that character do still exist, and taking around essentially the living dead of his own comrades is up there as far as Mayuri stuff goes. It is twisted, but you kind of have to love it as well because it's very in line with the character. But he helps Byakuya defeat Pepe Wakabrada, and essentially saves the day here as well. And this really, again, is just part and parcel of why Mayuri is such an MVP in this arc. You know, he goes around solving problems, essentially. Which, again, is why it was so weird to me that he was just completely let off the hook by Kubo about his past crimes. It's just not brought up by anyone at all. And I think a lot of that might have something to do with the shift in tone of the Thousand Year Blood War arc. You'll notice back when the arc began, there was this idea that this was a just war, that both sides felt they were right, and it was not black and white as to who was good and who was evil. I think it was like chapter 492 off the top of my head or something like that, where Hidetomo Kajomaru talks to Shino and Yuki about the Quincy. Basically says, you know, you've learnt a bit about them, but really what happened in the past, you know, we wiped them out. And whether you like it or not, yeah, it was probably the right thing to do, but they're not going to see it like that. And this is a just war because both sides believe they are in the right. Fascinating stuff that unfortunately does kind of go out of the window. Like, the Quincy just don't care about the Purge or anything like that, and they just want to destroy all the worlds. They do kind of turn into cookie cutter bad guys, and I love the Vandenreich. You know, I am a staunch proponent of the Vandenreich as enemies in Bleach, but there's no denying that the idea of a just war gets dropped pretty quickly. And they do turn into just almost straight bad guys, but that's fine. I think the series needed straight up villains at the end of the day anyway, but to really make the war feel like there were real stakes. But that's why I think Mayuri gets let off the hook, because he is on the good guy's side. And like I said, he is being heralded as something of a hero of war here. Very much so, he is taking the role of commander, and he is leading the forefront of the battle, which is something I never thought I would say about Mayuri before this arc, but he really comes into his own here, wearing his ridiculous sunflower suit and everything, but that somehow makes it sweeter. But he and Kisuke are definitely commanders. They are communicating with one another, which is great to see as well. And Mayuri is just doing wonders for his own character in this arc. But he's not seen again until the Shinigami are trying to break into the royal palace. Mayuri returns to his own lab, having kind of gone round and collected up the corpses that he can. And it's another great moment, because Kisuke has, at this point, because Kisuke hasn't left the lab, taken over it and is now running operations, and he's trying to build this gate to get them to the royal palace. And Mayuri kind of shows up and he's like, oh, look who's having a great time in a lab that's not his. But I love that there isn't really any animosity there anymore. You know, the time is dire. Not only is the Soul King now under threat, but Yhwach and his Schutzstaffel are advancing on the royal palace itself, and the Shinigami need to get up there. There is a real sense of urgency with the stakes that is actually, in my opinion, facilitated by characters' change in nature, and Mayuri is one of them. He is ready and willing to just get the job done. And, you know, nowhere is that exemplified better than his reaction to Kisuke. Kisuke summoned everyone to Mayuri's lab, and Mayuri's not that bothered about it, and I love that. You know, he's like, I got the summons, so I thought I'd come over and check anyway, and he helps them with the whole Reiatsu amplifying machine, which kind of comes out of nowhere to save the day, but it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I love it. I love seeing these characters come together to save the day. Of course, Aizen later shows up when everything regarding the Soul King begins happening, and we once again see Mayuri taking his role as a captain seriously. He's very much on their side. He's using his technology to keep Aizen restrained. And I love that. Again, I think it's great. I think it's the first time Mayuri and Aizen have ever actually interacted on screen, but it works really, really well. They're both incredibly prideful. But this time it's Mayuri who has the world's best interests at heart. And there's just a lot of great moments for Mayuri in this arc in general, before we move on to the Varvelt stuff, where he says things to Ikkaku and Yumichika like, you know, isn't that, you know, the will of the Gotei 13 and the will of the late Captain Commander that you admired so much, when they're talking about, you know, you have to lay down your lives to protect the Soul Society. Mayuri would never talk about this sort of thing before this arc. And I think it does wonders for him. It adds another layer of depth to him, where actually you find out maybe he has been listening this whole time to what the other captains have been telling him, what they've been telling each other, and some of it has actually resonated with him. You know, Mayuri clearly, even though he doesn't show it, he was somewhat listening to what Yamamoto was saying about what the Soul Society is and what it means to people. And again, you get a similar moment with Byakuya, where Byakuya is chastising Mayuri for essentially keeping the dead around, and Mayuri's like, I think they would want to serve the Soul Society even in death. And Byakuya's like, you know, that's not a great way of looking at it. And Mayuri's like, well, you have your way, I have mine. It's all these little moments that are sprinkled throughout that really hammer home to me just how major a role Kubo gave Mayuri in this arc, as not only one of the major captains on the battlefield, but just like this fountain of wisdom as well. It is a real tonal shift for the character. But anyway, they go up to Varvelt. Mayuri, you know, lets a little bit of his tricksy side come through, and he goes through a separate doorway to everyone else, hoping to conduct some research of his own. But it's a comedic moment when it turns out that Kenpachi has gone with him, completely thwarting his plan. And then Mayuri ends up fighting Sternma to see Pernida Pankajaz in one of the best fights in the entire arc. And of course, I'm not going to go, again, super deep. It's a majorly long fight, but it is really, really good. And I'm seriously looking forward to the battle analysis of this one. And I think Mayuri was the perfect opponent for Pernida. You know, maybe someone else could have fought Giselle. Did Mayuri need 2 fights almost back-to-back? Possibly not. But the fight with Pernida is phenomenally good. You know, surprisingly good. Mayuri is one of my favourite characters in the series, but I've never been a huge fan of his fights. I don't find them to be that interesting outside of the one with Uryu. But the one with Pernida is great because it really puts him on the ropes. He loses his sunlight suit and you get this really cool, like, ragged version of Mayuri revealed underneath. It's like the true crazy scientist, or almost like the true... It's kind of interesting because I'm thinking about it, and it's like the flowery nature of this suit really represents Mayuri's more superficial qualities. He is incredibly prideful, very flamboyant. You know, he's so over the top. He paints his face different patterns all the time. You know, he's a completely theatrical guy at the end of the day. And when the sunlight suit is removed during the Pernida fight, it signals a couple of things. It signals the stakes are suddenly more real for Mayuri than they've been in the arc so far. He's actually in real danger, and it also strips everything back as well, and it reveals the resourceful scientist underneath all of that. You know, underneath all of the superficial nonsense, how theatrical he is, how over the top he is, how arrogant and prideful he is underneath very resourceful, very smart. And you see that firsthand when he, like, quickly reworks the nerves in his own arm to protect himself from the compulsory, all that sort of thing. Is awesome. And I can't wait to go into that fight in more depth in a separate video. But it is really good. But you obviously also get a nice bit about his relationship with Nemu. Nemu is obviously killed by Pernida during that fight, which was quite surprising. But Mayuri's response is, again, shocking. And it's the sort of thing we'll talk about more in his character analysis video, because his relationship with Nemu has evolved dramatically throughout the series, to the point where Soul Society, Mayuri, and Nemu barely feel like the same characters anymore as they are as these current-day counterparts. But Mayuri does view Nemu as a perfect being, like his perfect creation that he managed to get exactly right. And I will say that I very much enjoy the hallucination of Xyloporo. I think it phenomenal timing, and it works really, really well to showcase Mayuri's psyche in that moment. Xyloporo was never my favourite Espada, far from it, but he works wonders here to come back, biting back at Mayuri about his speech about perfection from the Waco Mundo arc, and how, you know, basically saying, you talked down to me as a scientist because I believed in perfection, and you said it was a dead end, and now look at you, you've done the exact same thing. And this, of course, gives Mayuri the gusto he needs to end the fight against Pernida. And yeah, I love it. I think it's phenomenally good. And this fight's great as well because Mayuri actually takes damage, which is nice to see. He basically loses one of his arms, he loses both of his legs. He gets messed up. Most of the Schutzstaffel manage to achieve this, to be fair, which is partly why I think they're so effective, but that's, again, another video for another day. But yeah, Mayuri gets wrecked in that fight, and he loses Nemu. But we are coming to a close now regarding Mayuri's role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and there's one last scene I want to talk about. There's obviously the epilogue, but before that, there is a pivotal scene, and there's a reason this is the last time you see Mayuri before the end of the war. And it's because it exemplifies everything he has become, the way he has changed, and that is the fact that he is now, his limp body is being carried by Ikkaku and Yumachika. He's being put inside one of his pods, and he says, you know, you can use the other pod for Kenpachi. Kenpachi. Like, it's important as well to remember that these characters do not like each other one bit, and they never have. You know, like I said at the beginning of the video, they are very similar beings, but that also means they butt heads. They're on different ends of the spectrum. You know, Mayuri thinks Kenpachi is a moron. Kenpachi thinks Mayuri is just finicky and into all this stuff that means it's not a good fight. It's worthless. But Mayuri says, you know, you can put Kenpachi in one of those pods, and Mayuri's whole character development, in my opinion, is summed up in that one panel where Ikkaku and Yumichika kneel before him and they're like, thank you so much. They just say thank you to him and then they leave. And, you know, you have to remember that Mayuri's almost like his earliest introduction was Kenpachi grabbing his arm in the infirmary because he was about to attack Ikkaku because Ikkaku wouldn't tell him about Ichigo. And obviously there is a fundamental difference in worldview between squads 11 and 12, but it doesn't matter here. You know, the war is desperate, times are desperate, the assault on Varvelt is already taking people out, and they're just grateful that he helped Kenpachi at the end of the day. And Mayuri's like, oh, you know, this is very uncharacteristic, I'm getting thanked a lot at the moment. And it's true, because he is doing so much for the Soul Society that he didn't do before. Then, of course, you have the epilogue, but nothing really important happens in it. It's just Mayuri saying that he's going to build some secret network, and then he's there when Yhwach Ryatsu disappears. But that is it, really, for Mayuri's role in the 1,000-Year Blood War. He, like I said, he plays a big part. So I always figured this was going to be a slightly longer video, but yeah, I adore what Kubo does with Mayuri in this arc. He really steps up to the plate as a commander on the front line of war. You know, I said it before, he takes his position as captain seriously at last. He actually wants something to do with the greater good of the Soul Society, and it seems like the words of Yamamoto have resonated with Mayuri, and he actually wants to be a team player. I think that's the most important and easiest, most concise way of putting it. He wants to be a team player, and I love that. I think it comes across really well, and his development, as far as I'm concerned, is just capped off wonderfully in this arc. And in fact, in my top 10 winners of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc video, I'm going to spoil it for you, I put Mayuri at number 1, and that's just one of the many reasons why I think his character development is handled really, really well. And yeah, I love the way he goes front and center. But you know, he gets beaten up in the end. You know, Mayuri's one of these characters who always kind of gets accused of having just sciencey powers that allow him to get out of any problem. And that does kind of happen, but I like that Pernida really keeps him on his toes. So that'll be a great fight to talk about in the near future. But that's it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. I love talking about Mayuri, clearly. But he's a fascinating character and one of Kubo's best. And he just goes places in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc that I don't think anyone really expected him to way back when. So, like I said before, I thought he was going to play a major role, but in terms of the Quincy were going to get revenge on him, I thought perhaps Uryu would get revenge on Mayuri as a show of his own strength, but that obviously never comes to pass. But regardless, I like the angle Kubo took the mad scientist. That's it for this video, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Mayuri during the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Do you enjoy his character, or would you rather have seen him just get his just desserts? Would you rather have seen one of the Quincy's blow him away with an arrow? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. See you then.